The snow bit into Eli's knees, each flake a needle against his skin as he knelt in the backyard, shivering under his mother's unrelenting gaze. "You'll stay there until you repent," she'd hissed, her voice as cold as the Vermont winter that enveloped their small, gray house. He was 16, and the sin he was meant to purge was loving someone he wasn't supposed to, a boy named Caleb from church. Eli's world had fractured that winter of 2010. His mother, Margaret, was a pillar of their tight-knit community, her faith as rigid as the iron cross above their fireplace. When she caught Eli and Caleb stealing a kiss behind the church, her rage was biblical. She dragged Eli home, her grip bruising, and forced him to kneel in the snow for hours, praying for forgiveness he didn't feel he needed. Caleb's family moved away soon after, and Eli learned to bury his heart deep, where no one could touch it. But the cold of that night seeped into his bones, a wound that never fully healed. Years later, in the autumn of 2025, Eli stood in a different world. Burlington, Vermont, had grown kinder, its streets alive with color and acceptance. At 25, Eli was no longer the trembling boy who knelt in shame. He was a graphic designer, his work vibrant and bold, his life a quiet rebellion against the past. He lived in a cozy apartment above a bookstore, its walls lined with sketches of landscapes and faces, none of them his mother's. Eli's phone buzzed as he sipped coffee on his balcony, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. It was a text from Noah, the man who'd been unraveling his guarded heart for the past 6 months. "Meet me at the bridge tonight. Got something to tell you." Eli smiled, warmth spreading through him. Noah was everything he hadn't dared hope for. Gentle, witty, with eyes that saw through Eli's walls without judgment. The bridge was their place, a quiet spot over the Winooski River where they'd shared their first kiss under a harvest moon. Eli arrived as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. Noah was already there, leaning against the railing, his blonde hair catching the light. He turned, and his smile was a beacon, pulling Eli closer. "You look like you're up to something," Eli teased, stepping into Noah's orbit. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers lacing together. "Maybe I am," Noah said, his voice soft but charged with something unspoken. "Eli, I've been thinking about us, about what we could be." Eli's heart stuttered. He'd spent years guarding himself, afraid of love's cost. But Noah's presence was a steady warmth, melting the ice of that long-ago winter. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Noah's eyes held his, unwavering. "I'm saying I love you, Eli, and I want a life with you, here or anywhere." The words hit like a wave, washing away the last of Eli's defenses. He pulled Noah close, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. The world around them faded, the river's murmur, the rustle of leaves, until it was just them, two souls finding home in each other. But the moment was shattered by a familiar voice, sharp and cutting. "Elijah." Eli froze, his blood turning to ice. He turned to see his mother standing at the end of the bridge, her face a mask of disapproval. Margaret hadn't changed. Same severe bun, same gray coat, same eyes that judged without mercy. She hadn't spoken to Eli in years, not since he'd left home at 18, but her presence still carried the weight of that snowy night. "What are you doing here?" Eli asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I heard you were living like this," she said, her gaze flicking to Noah with disgust. "I came to see if it was true, to see if my son was still lost." Noah stepped forward, his hand tightening around Eli's. "He's not lost. He's exactly where he's meant to be." Margaret's lips thinned. "You don't know what's best for him." "I do. I always have." Eli's chest tightened, memories of snow and shame flooding back. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He straightened, meeting her gaze. "You don't get to decide who I am, Mother. Not anymore." The standoff lingered, the air thick with unspoken history. Margaret turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. Eli exhaled, leaning into Noah's warmth, but a seed of resolve took root. He'd spent years running from his past, but maybe it was time to face it, not for her but for himself. That night, Eli lay awake in Noah's arms, the weight of his mother's visit pressing against his ribs. He hadn't told Noah the full story of that winter, the humiliation that had shaped him. But as Noah slept, his breathing soft, and even Eli made a decision. He wouldn't let Margaret's shadow define him any longer. He'd confront her, not with anger, but with the truth of who he was, a truth she couldn't erase. The next morning, Eli drove to the old house, the one he'd sworn never to return to. It looked smaller now, the paint peeling, the cross above the fireplace rusted. Margaret answered the door, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to fight," Eli said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to tell you who I am. And you're going to listen." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside, letting him in. The house smelled of dust and old hymnals, a time capsule of pain. Eli took a breath, ready to begin, knowing this conversation would change everything. The living room was a shrine to Margaret's faith. Crosses on every wall, a Bible open on the coffee table, its pages worn from years of fervent reading. Eli stood in the center, feeling like a stranger in the house where he'd grown up. Margaret sat stiffly on the edge of an armchair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if bracing for a sermon she didn't want to hear. "I'm not the son you wanted," Eli began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I never was, but I'm done apologizing for it." Margaret's lips parted, but Eli raised a hand, silencing her. "No, you listen. You made me kneel in the snow when I was 16, told me I was broken, that I was a sin. Do you know what that did to me? Do you know how long it took to unlearn the shame you carved into me?" Her face twitched, a flicker of something, guilt, defiance, he couldn't tell. "I was trying to save you," she said, her voice low. The Bible isn't your weapon to wield against me," Eli cut in. "You used it to justify your fear, your control. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm gay, Mother. I love Noah, and I'm proud of who I am." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She never did. "You're choosing a path to damnation," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "The only damnation I ever felt was right here, in this house." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Elijah, wait." There was a crack in her tone, something he'd never heard before. He faced her, wary but curious. "I don't understand you," she said, her hands twisting together. "But you're still my son." Eli's heart ached, not with hope, but with the weight of years lost. "Being your son doesn't mean I owe you my soul," he said. "If you ever want to know me, really know me, you'll have to accept all of me. Until then, we're strangers." He walked out, the door closing softly behind him. The autumn air was sharp, cleansing as he drove back to Burlington. Noah was waiting at the apartment, sketching at the kitchen table, his presence a balm to Eli's raw edges. "How did it go?" Noah asked, setting down his pencil. Eli sank onto the couch, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I said what I needed to. I don't know if it changed anything, but I feel lighter." Noah crossed the room, sitting beside him, their knees touching. "You're enough, Eli, just as you are." The words were a lifeline, pulling Eli back from the edge of his past. He leaned into Noah, their foreheads touching, and for the first time, he felt truly free, not from his mother's judgment, but from the fear that had defined him. Over the next few weeks, Eli threw himself into his work, his designs bolder, more vibrant. He and Noah began planning a future, maybe a house by the river, maybe a dog. But the shadow of Margaret lingered. She started calling, leaving voicemails that Eli didn't answer. "I just want to talk," she'd say, her voice softer than he remembered. He wasn't ready, not yet. One evening, as Eli and Noah walked hand in hand through Burlington's Church Street Marketplace. A festival filled the air with music and laughter. Rainbow flags fluttered above the stalls, a reminder of how far the world had come. Eli felt a pang of gratitude for this place, this moment, where he could love openly. But then he saw her, Margaret, standing near a coffee cart, watching them. Her face was unreadable, but she didn't approach. Noah noticed her too, his grip tightening on Eli's hand. "Do you want to talk to her?" Noah asked quietly. Eli hesitated, his heart a tangle of anger and longing. "Not tonight," he said finally. "This is our night." They kept walking, the festival's lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. But Eli couldn't shake the image of his mother's face, the way her eyes had lingered on them. Was it judgment, or was something else? He didn't know, but the question gnawed at him. Back at the apartment, Eli sat at his desk, sketching a new design, a bridge over a river, two figures standing close, their shadows merging into one. It was a vision of him and Noah, but also a metaphor for the gap he still felt with his mother. Could it ever be crossed? The next morning, Eli found a letter slipped under his door. The handwriting was unmistakable, Margaret's precise, angular script. His hands shook as he opened it, unsure what to expect. The words were simple, almost fragile. "I don't understand your world, Elijah, but I want to try. Meet me at the church tomorrow. Please." Eli stared at the letter, his heart pounding. This was no apology, no grand gesture, but it was something, a crack in the wall she'd built between them. He showed it to Noah, who read it silently, then looked up with a gentle smile. "What do you want to do?" Noah asked. Eli took a deep breath, the weight of the past pressing against the hope of something new. I think I'll go." The church hadn't changed in the decade since Eli last stepped inside. Its white steeple pierced the gray autumn sky, and the pews still smelled of polished wood and old hymnals. Eli stood at the threshold, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. Margaret was already there, seated in the front row, her head bowed as if in prayer. The sight stirred a memory of that snowy night, her voice commanding him to repent. But he wasn't here to kneel. "Mother," he said, his voice echoing in the quiet sanctuary. Margaret looked up, her face softer than he expected, lines etched deeper by time. "Elijah," she said, standing, "thank you for coming." They sat across from each other, the pews a barrier between them. Eli's hands clenched in his lap, bracing for judgment. But Margaret's eyes held something new, uncertainty, maybe even regret. "I've been reading," she began, her voice tentative. "Books, articles about people like you. I don't understand it all, but I'm trying. I want to know you, Elijah. Not the boy I thought I could mold, but the man you are." Eli's throat tightened. He'd dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, it felt fragile, like a glass ornament that could shatter with one wrong word. "Why now?" he asked. "After all these years, why do you care?" Margaret's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. "When I saw you with him at the festival, you looked happy. Truly happy. I haven't seen that since you were a child. It made me question everything." Her words hit like a stone, stirring a mix of anger and hope. "You hurt me," Eli said, his voice raw. "You made me feel like I was nothing. Do you know what it's like to hate yourself because of your own mother?" Margaret flinched, her eyes glistening. "I thought I was doing right by you. I was wrong, Elijah. I see that now. But I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," Eli said, the truth sharp but necessary. "You can't undo the past. But you can choose what happens next." They sat in silence, the weight of years pressing down. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice barely audible. "Can we start again? Not as we were, but as we are." Eli didn't answer right away. He thought of Noah, of the life they were building, of the freedom he'd fought for. Could he let his mother into that world? Did he want to? "I don't know if I can trust you," he said finally, "but I'm willing to try. One step at a time." Margaret nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was the first time Eli had ever seen her cry. One step, she agreed. They left the church separately, the autumn wind carrying the scent of rain. Eli drove back to Burlington, his mind a storm of emotions. Noah was waiting at the apartment, cooking dinner, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air. "How was it?" Noah asked, stirring a pot of sauce. Eli leaned against the counter, exhaling. "It was a start. She's trying, I think. But it's going to take time." Noah set down the spoon and pulled Eli into a hug. "You're doing this on your terms. That's what matters." Over the next few weeks, Eli and Margaret met occasionally. Awkward coffees at a diner, brief walks by the river. She asked questions, sometimes clumsy, about his life, his work, Noah. Eli answered cautiously, guarding his heart, but leaving the door open. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. One evening, Noah suggested inviting Margaret to dinner. Eli hesitated, the idea both terrifying and hopeful. "Are you sure?" he asked. Noah smiled, his eyes warm. "She's part of your story, Eli. Maybe it's time she sees the whole picture." The dinner was set for a Saturday, and Eli spent the week preparing, his nerves fraying. He and Noah cooked together, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pie for dessert. The apartment was warm, filled with the soft glow of candles and the sound of jazz from a record player. When Margaret arrived, she looked out of place, her coat too formal for their cozy space. But she smiled, a small, hesitant thing, and handed Eli a bottle of wine. "I didn't know what you liked," she said. "It's perfect," Eli lied, setting it on the table. Dinner was tentative at first, the conversation stilted. But Noah, with his easy charm, drew Margaret out, asking about her garden, her book club. She softened, even laughed once, and Eli felt a strange relief. This wasn't reconciliation, but it was a glimpse of what could be. As Margaret left, she paused at the door, looking at Eli. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me in." Eli nodded, his throat tight. "Good night, Mother." After she was gone, Noah wrapped an arm around him. "You okay?" Eli leaned into him, the weight of the evening settling. "Yeah, I think I am." Winter crept into Burlington, dusting the streets with snow that reminded Eli of that long-ago night. But this winter felt different, lighter, as if the cold no longer had a claim on him. He and Noah were planning a trip to Montreal, a getaway to celebrate their first year together. Eli's designs were gaining traction, with a local gallery offering him a solo exhibition. Life was good, but the shadow of his mother lingered, a question mark in his heart. Margaret had been true to her word, making small efforts to understand him. She sent articles she'd read, asked about Noah's job as a teacher, even attended a community event with a rainbow flag in the crowd. But Eli remained cautious, waiting for the moment she'd revert to the woman who'd made him kneel in the snow. One afternoon, as Eli sketched in his studio, his phone rang. It was Margaret, her voice trembling. "Elijah, I need to see you. It's important." The urgency in her tone set him on edge. He met her at a cafe near the church, where she sat with a cup of tea, her face pale. "I'm sick," she said bluntly. "Cancer. They found it last month." Eli's world tilted. He'd imagined confronting her, forgiving her, even cutting her off, but not this. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice hollow. "They're hopeful, but it's serious. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I didn't know how else to reach you." Eli stared at the table, the grain of the wood blurring. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice breaking. "Not again. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right." The words cut deep, stirring a storm of anger and grief. Eli wanted to scream, to tell her it was too late, but the vulnerability in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't the unyielding woman of his childhood anymore. She was human, frail, afraid. "I need time," he said finally, standing. "I'll call you." He drove home in a daze, the snow falling heavier now. Noah was grading papers at the kitchen table, his glasses slipping down his nose. Eli told him everything, the words spilling out like a confession. Noah listened, his hand resting on Eli's. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said. "But whatever you choose, I'm here." Eli nodded, grateful for Noah's steadiness. That night, he dreamed of the snowy backyard, but this time he wasn't kneeling. He was standing, his hand in Noah's, the cold no match for their warmth. The next week, Eli visited Margaret at her house. She looked smaller, her hair thinner, but her eyes were bright with determination. They talked, not about the past, but about small things. Her garden, his art, the weather. It was awkward, but it was a start. Over the months, Eli found himself drawn into her world again, not as the boy she tried to break, but as the man he'd become. He helped her with doctor's appointments, brought her books to read during chemo. Margaret, in turn, began to open up, sharing stories of her own childhood, her fears, her regrets. She never apologized outright, but her actions spoke louder than words. One evening, as they sat in her living room, the cross above the fireplace catching the light, Margaret reached for Eli's hand. "I was wrong," she said, her voice steady. "About so many things. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself from change, from fear. I'm sorry, Elijah." The words were a balm, soothing a wound Eli hadn't realized was still bleeding. He squeezed her hand, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was enough for now. As spring bloomed, Margaret's health stabilized, and Eli's exhibition opened at the gallery. Noah helped him hang his pieces, each one a story of resilience and love. Margaret came to the opening, her first time seeing Eli's work. She lingered in front of a painting of the bridge, the two figures bathed in golden light. "This is you and Noah, isn't it?" she asked, her voice soft. Eli nodded, his heart full. "Yeah, it's us." She smiled, a real smile, and for the first time, Eli saw something like pride in her eyes. The gallery buzzed around them, but in that moment, it was just them, mother and son, finding their way back to each other. The gallery exhibition was a triumph, with Eli's paintings drawing crowds and praise. But for Eli, the real victory was seeing his mother there, standing among his friends, Noah's arm around his shoulders. Margaret didn't fully understand his world, but she was trying, and that was more than he'd ever expected. As summer unfolded, Eli and Noah moved into a small house by the Winooski River, their bridge just a short walk away. They adopted a dog, a scruffy, mutt-named River, who bounded through their lives with unbridled joy. Margaret visited often, bringing cuttings from her garden or recipes she thought they'd like. She and Noah developed an easy rapport, trading stories and jokes, while Eli watched, marveling at the slow mending of their fractured bond. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, Margaret pulled out a photo album, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this in the attic," she said, opening it to a picture of Eli as a child, grinning with a paintbrush in hand. "You were always creating, even then." Eli traced the photo, a lump in his throat. "I thought you hated my art. You said it was a distraction from faith." Margaret's face fell. "I was wrong about so much. Your art is your heart, Elijah. I see that now." The words were a gift, one Eli hadn't known he needed. He hugged her, the first real embrace they'd shared in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. As autumn returned, painting Burlington in fiery hues, Eli and Noah planned a commitment ceremony on their bridge. It was small, just close friends, river bounding around, and Margaret, who'd insisted on baking the cake. The river sparkled under the setting sun, and as Eli and Noah exchanged vows, their hands clasped tightly, Eli felt a peace he'd never known. "I promise to love you through every storm," Noah said, his voice steady, his eyes shining. "And I promise to stand with you, always," Eli replied, his heart full. Margaret watched from the sidelines, her eyes wet, but smiling. When the ceremony ended, she approached, hesitant. "I'm proud of you, Elijah," she said, her voice thick. Both of you. Eli hugged her, the weight of the past lifting like mist. Thank you, Mom, he said, the word feeling new and right. That night, as guests danced under string lights, Eli and Noah slipped away to the bridge's edge, watching the river flow. We made it, Eli whispered, his head resting on Noah's shoulder. We did, Noah said, kissing his temple. And we're just getting started. Years later, when Eli thought of revenge, it wasn't the cold, bitter kind he'd once imagined. It was this, living fully, loving fiercely, building a life that shone brighter than the shame his mother had once tried to impose. Margaret had changed, not because he forced her to, but because he showed her who he was unapologetically. And in that, he found redemption, not just for her, but for himself. The snow would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Eli stood on the bridge, Noah's hand in his, river at their feet, and the world felt warm, whole, in his.